Tell them what you do for a living. Celeste Harrington smiled as the room fell quiet, every guest turning toward the black woman standing near the marble staircase. Avellini Mercer wore a simple navy dress and held her hands calmly in front of her. Around her, the CEO's wife had gathered 12 guests beneath crystal chandeliers, polished portraits, and warm golden lights. Celeste lifted her champagne glass and waited. Avellini looked at her for a moment. "I clean houses," she said. A few guests laughed. Celeste laughed louder. "Exactly," she said. "She keeps this entire place spotless." Avellini did not lower her eyes. She simply stood there, composed, as though she had expected this moment. Celeste had invited her to the party as a joke, and everyone in the room seemed to understand it except perhaps the woman being mocked. One guest whispered something to another. Someone smiled behind a glass. Celeste stepped closer and gestured toward the elegant room. "You spend your days here, but tonight you get to see how the other half lives." Avellini glanced around the room. "I have seen it before." Celeste's smile tightened. "Have you?" Before Avellini could answer, the doorbell rang. The conversation stopped. Celeste turned toward the entrance, clearly irritated by the interruption. One of the household staff opened the massive front door. A black sedan waited outside beneath the driveway lights. A distinguished man in a dark suit stepped out, carrying a leather portfolio. He was followed by two professionally dressed people, who looked completely out of place at an ordinary dinner party. Celeste's expression changed the moment she saw them. The smile disappeared. Her hand lowered slowly from the glass. "Why are they here?" she whispered. Nobody answered. The man entered the foyer and scanned the room. He did not look at Celeste. He did not look at the other guests. His eyes moved directly toward Avellini. Then he walked across the marble floor and stopped in front of her. "Miss Mercer," he said respectfully, "we have been looking for you." The room went silent. Celeste stared at Avellini as if she were seeing her for the first time. Avellini remained calm. She did not smile. She did not explain. She simply looked at the man and gave a small nod. Celeste's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Avellini, who is he?" Avellini turned toward her. For the first time that evening, Celeste seemed to understand that the joke might never have been hers to control. 3 hours earlier, Avellini Mercer had been standing quietly in the Harrington Mansion kitchen, polishing a set of silver serving trays while the household prepared for the evening party. The marble counters reflected the warm pendant lights, and the faint sound of piano music drifted from the formal living room. She had worked in the house for months, arriving before most of the staff and leaving after the last room had been restored to perfect order. Nobody asked much about her life. Nobody seemed particularly interested. To Celeste Harrington, Avellini was simply the cleaner who knew which floors needed extra attention, and which windows showed fingerprints under afternoon light. Avellini had never complained about that assumption. She had learned that people often revealed more about themselves when they believed nobody important was listening. That afternoon, Celeste entered the kitchen holding a garment bag. "You are coming to the party tonight," she said. Avellini looked up from the tray. "I am working tonight. Not as staff." Celeste placed the garment bag on the counter. "I want you in the living room." Avellini studied her face. "Why?" Celeste smiled. "Because I thought it would be interesting." There was something about the way she said interesting that made Avellini pause. She opened the garment bag and saw a simple navy dress inside. It was tasteful, but clearly chosen to make her look like someone who did not belong among the evening's wealthy guests. Avellini touched the fabric briefly. "You want me to attend your party?" "I want you to have a little fun." Celeste smiled again. "You spend enough time cleaning up after everyone else." Avellini understood the invitation. It was not kindness. It was entertainment. Still she nodded. "All right." Celeste seemed pleased. "Perfect. Just be ready by 7. After she left, Avellini returned to the tray. She worked for another 20 minutes before slipping a small envelope from the inside pocket of her work bag. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed and marked with a simple black emblem. She looked at it without opening it. The name printed across the front read Mercer Holdings. Avellini turned it over in her hands, then placed it carefully back into the bag. She did not need to read the letter again. She already knew what it contained. At 7 o'clock, the mansion transformed. Crystal lights brightened the dining room. Guests arrived in tailored suits and elegant evening clothes. Expensive cars filled the driveway. Laughter carried through the halls. Avellini changed into the navy dress and stood quietly near the entrance, watching the room fill. Celeste approached her with a satisfied smile. "Ready?" Avellini nodded. "Yes." Celeste looked toward her guests, then back at Avellini. "Good. Tonight, everyone is going to meet someone very special." Avellini said nothing. She simply glanced toward the envelope hidden inside her bag. She had agreed to come because she already knew tonight could change everything. She just did not know how quickly the room would reveal itself. By 7:15, Celeste Harrington had become the center of her own carefully arranged world. She moved through the mansion in a champagne-colored evening dress, checking the dining room, the flowers, the candles, and the placement of every guest as if the entire night depended on her attention. In a way it did. Celeste had spent years learning how to make wealth visible. The marble floors had been polished until they reflected the chandeliers. The dining table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. A string quartet played softly near the staircase, while guests from New York business circles exchanged compliments beneath warm golden lights. Celeste watched them with satisfaction. These were the people she wanted to impress. Investors, executives, lawyers, and spouses who knew exactly which names mattered in the city. Her husband, the CEO of Harrington Industries, was expected to arrive later after an evening meeting, and Celeste wanted everything to look effortless before he walked through the door. Then her eyes landed on Avellini. The black cleaner stood quietly near the edge of the living room in the navy dress Celeste had chosen for her. She was not touching the decorations or interrupting the guests. She simply watched the room with calm attention. Celeste smiled. "Avellini," she called. Avellini turned. "Yes. Come over here." Avellini walked toward her. Several guests looked over. Celeste lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent them from hearing. "I thought it would be fun if everyone met you." Avellini glanced around the room. "There are many people here." "Exactly." Celeste looked pleased with herself. "You spend so much time working around people like this. Tonight you get to stand with them." Avellini noticed the emphasis on the word them. She said nothing. Celeste placed a hand lightly against the back of a nearby chair. "Tell me, Avellini, what is the most unusual thing you have ever cleaned?" A few guests turned toward them. Avellini considered the question. "That depends on what you mean by unusual." Someone smiled. Celeste laughed softly. "See? She has a sense of humor." Avellini remained composed. "I was answering your question." The smile on Celeste's face became thinner. She had expected embarrassment. Instead, Avellini gave her nothing to work with. Celeste looked toward her guests. "She is very quiet when she works. Sometimes I forget she is even there." Avellini looked at her. "I have noticed." One guest covered a smile with a hand. Celeste quickly changed direction. "Well, tonight she is not working." She picked up a glass from the table and offered it to Avellini. "Tonight, she is our special guest." Avellini accepted the glass but did not drink. She looked across the room and noticed something Celeste had missed. The front entrance was visible from where she stood. The driveway beyond the glass doors was empty. For now. Avellini glanced briefly toward the bag she had left near the hallway. The sealed envelope from Mercer Holdings was still inside. Celeste noticed her looking away and mistook the movement for nervousness. "Relax," she said. "Everyone here is friendly." Avellini looked back at her. "I know." Celeste smiled again and turned toward her guests. "Then let us begin." The music grew slightly louder. Conversation resumed. But Avellini remained still, listening to the room and waiting. She knew someone was coming. She simply did not know whether Celeste would recognize the person before the front door opened. Avellini waited until the music grew louder before quietly stepping away from the gathering and walking toward the hallway. Nobody stopped her. The guests were too busy listening to Celeste describe the renovation of the mansion to notice where she had gone. Avellini reached the small table near the coat closet, picked up her bag, and carried it into a quiet sitting room. She closed the door halfway and took out the cream-colored envelope she had been carrying all evening. The black emblem on the front caught the warm light from the lamp. Mercer Holdings. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of everything that name represented. Then she opened it. Inside was a single document and a handwritten note. The document contained a list of names, dates, and company information. The note contained only one sentence. "We will be at the residence at 8:15. Avellini checked the time on her phone. 8:12. 3 minutes. She folded the note and returned it to the envelope. She had not come to the Harrington mansion to embarrass Celeste. She had not come to prove that she was better than anyone in the room. She had come because a decision was waiting to be made, and she needed to understand the people involved before making it. For the past several weeks, Avellini had listened more than she spoke. She had watched how employees were treated when senior guests were present. She had noticed which staff members were thanked and which were ignored. She had seen how quickly conversations changed when someone important entered a room. Tonight had confirmed more than enough. A soft knock came from the hallway. Avellini quickly placed the envelope back inside her bag. One of the household employees stood at the doorway. "Miss Harrington is looking for you." Avellini nodded. "I will be there in a moment." The employee hesitated. "She wants you in the main room." "I understand." When Avellini returned to the party, Celeste was standing beside the fireplace, surrounded by guests. She smiled when she saw Avellini. "There you are." Avellini stopped a few feet away. "You wanted me?" Celeste lifted her glass. "I was beginning to think our special guest had disappeared." Few people smiled. Avellini remained calm. "I stepped away for a moment." Celeste looked toward the others. "Well, do not disappear again. I have something planned." Avellini studied her expression. "What kind of plan?" Celeste laughed. "You will see." Avellini glanced toward the front entrance. 8:14. The driveway remained empty. Celeste continued talking, unaware that the woman she had invited for entertainment was watching the clock. 8:15 arrived. The doorbell rang. The room gradually fell silent. Celeste looked toward the entrance with mild annoyance, expecting another guest who had arrived late. Avellini did not move. Her expression remained composed, but her eyes sharpened with recognition. The household employee opened the door. A man in a dark suit stood outside with two professionally dressed women behind him. He held a leather portfolio and looked directly into the room. Celeste smiled politely for half a second. Then she recognized him. The color drained from her expression. She lowered her glass. "No," she whispered. The man stepped inside. He did not look at Celeste. He did not greet the guests. His eyes went directly to Avellini. Then he said, "Miss Mercer, we have been waiting for you." The room went completely still. For several seconds nobody in the room moved. The man in the dark suit remained beside the open doorway, his leather portfolio held neatly at his side. The two women behind him stood quietly, each carrying a folder of documents. Celeste stared at them, then at Avellini, as though trying to connect two pieces of a puzzle that had never made sense before. "Miss Mercer," the man repeated. "I apologize for arriving during your dinner." Avellini gave him a calm nod. "You are right on time, Mr. Lawson." Celeste's eyes widened. "You know him?" Avellini looked toward her. "Yes." Celeste glanced around the room, searching for someone who could explain what was happening. "Why would a representative from Mercer Holdings be here?" she asked. Avellini did not answer immediately. Instead, Mr. Lawson opened his portfolio and removed a document. "We need your signature on the final authorization," he said. "Everything has been prepared." One of the guests leaned closer to another, whispering quietly. Celeste heard it and quickly raised her voice. "What authorization?" Mr. Lawson looked at her politely. "I believe that is a matter for Miss Mercer." Celeste's expression tightened. "This is my home." Avellini looked around the elegant room. "I know." Her voice remained gentle. "And you invited me here." Celeste stared at her. The words suddenly sounded different. An hour earlier, she had believed she was bringing a cleaner into her home for entertainment. Now she was beginning to wonder whether Avellini had accepted the invitation for an entirely different reason. Graham Harrington, Celeste's husband and the company's chief executive officer, had not yet arrived. His absence suddenly felt significant. Celeste lowered her glass onto the nearest table. Avellini, what exactly is going on? Avellini looked toward the guests. Every conversation had stopped. 12 people were watching her now. She could have explained everything. She could have opened the documents and revealed the truth immediately. Instead, she simply asked Mr. Lawson, "Did you bring the full report?" "Yes." "And the board members?" "They are waiting downstairs." Celeste heard those words and went completely still. "Board members?" Avellini nodded. "Yes." Celeste's face changed again. "For what?" Avellini looked at her for a long moment. "For a decision." The answer was simple, but it left the room even quieter. Celeste looked toward the front doors as if expecting her husband to arrive at any moment. Then she turned back to Avellini. "You are a cleaner." Avellini did not correct her. "That is what you hired me to be." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Then why is Mercer Holdings here?" Avellini looked down at the document Mr. Lawson had placed before her. "Because some decisions are easier to make when people believe you have no power." Celeste said nothing. Avellini picked up the pen. The guests watched as she signed the document with a steady hand. Mr. Lawson closed the portfolio. "Thank you, Miss Mercer." Avellini nodded. Celeste remained frozen beside the fireplace. She had spent the entire evening believing she was the person controlling the room. Now she was beginning to understand that the woman she had invited as a joke had been quietly observing everything from the beginning. And somewhere downstairs, the people waiting for Avellini were already preparing for the decision that would change the Harrington family's future. The silence in the room lasted until the sound of footsteps came from the marble staircase. Celeste turned sharply toward the entrance, and Graham Harrington finally appeared, still wearing the dark suit he had worn to his evening meeting. He stopped when he saw the guests gathered around the fireplace, then noticed the man from Mercer Holdings standing beside Avellini. "What is going on?" Graham asked. Celeste looked at him with an expression he had rarely seen on her face. Uncertainty. "I think you should ask her," she said. Graham looked at Avellini. For the first time, he studied her carefully instead of looking past her as he had so many times in his own home. "Avellini." She gave him a respectful nod. "Mr. Harrington." Graham glanced at the document on the table. "What did you sign?" Mr. Lawson answered before Avellini could. "The final authorization for the Mercer Holdings investment agreement." Graham's expression changed. "Mercer Holdings?" He looked at the document again. "Why would they be involved with my company?" Avellini remained quiet. Celeste stepped closer. "Tell him." Avellini looked at her. "You want me to explain?" Celeste hesitated. "Yes." Avellini took a slow breath. "Mercer Holdings has been reviewing Harrington Industries for several months." Graham stared at her. "Reviewing it for what?" "A possible controlling investment." The room seemed to shrink around them. Graham looked at Mr. Lawson. "Who authorized this?" Mr. Lawson turned toward Avellini. "Ms. Mercer did." Graham looked back at Avellini. "You?" She nodded. "Yes." Celeste whispered. "That is impossible." Avellini looked at her calmly. "Why?" Celeste could not answer. Graham moved toward the table and picked up the document. He scanned the first page, then the second. His expression became more serious with every line. "You are the principal representative?" he asked. "Yes." "Of Mercer Holdings?" "Yes." Graham looked at her again. "Then why have you been working in this house?" Avellini glanced around the room. The crystal lights, polished floors, expensive furniture, and guests who had laughed at her only minutes earlier were all still there. "Because I wanted to see how people here treated someone they believed had no influence." Graham lowered the document. Celeste looked away. Avellini continued, "I did not come here to deceive anyone. I came here because I needed to make an informed decision." Graham understood what she meant. The cleaning job had given her access to something money could not easily provide. She had seen the household without the polished presentation. She had watched employees being thanked, ignored, interrupted, and spoken to. She had listened when people assumed she did not matter. Celeste finally spoke. "So the entire time you were testing us?" Avellini shook her head. "No. I was observing." Graham looked toward his wife. Then he looked at the guests who had laughed earlier. Nobody seemed comfortable anymore. Mr. Lawson closed his portfolio. The board is ready downstairs whenever you are, Miss Mercer. Avellini nodded. She turned toward the staircase, but before she moved, Graham spoke quietly. Avellini. She stopped. Why did you stay tonight after what Celeste did? Avellini looked back at him. Because leaving would have given me less information than staying. Then she walked toward the staircase, leaving Graham and Celeste standing beneath the same chandelier that had once made the evening feel like a celebration. Now it felt like a room where everyone was finally seeing themselves clearly. The staircase led to a smaller conference room overlooking the city, where 3 board members from Mercer Holdings were already waiting around a long walnut table. Avellini entered first, followed by Mr. Lawson, while Graham and Celeste remained near the doorway for a moment. Before slowly joining them, the atmosphere had changed completely. There were no jokes now, no laughter, and no guests trying to impress one another. Everyone understood that the woman they had treated as a cleaner was now sitting at the center of an important business decision. Avellini placed the signed document on the table. Let us begin, she said. One of the board members opened a folder containing financial reports and market evaluations. Graham sat across from Avellini, reading carefully. Celeste remained beside him, unusually quiet. After several minutes, Graham finally looked up. The investment would give Mercer Holdings significant control of Harrington Industries. Avellini nodded. That is correct. Why would you want to do this? He asked. Avellini folded her hands on the table. Because your company has strong potential, but its leadership has weaknesses that cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Graham understood the implication. You mean the way employees are treated? Among other things. Celeste shifted in her chair. You made all of this sound like some kind of experiment. Avellini looked at her. It was not an experiment. Then what was it? An opportunity to see whether the people making decisions understood the people affected by them. The room became quiet again. Avellini opened another folder. Inside were notes she had taken during her time in the mansion. Nothing private or invasive. Just observations about workplace interactions, staffing decisions, and conversations she had overheard in common areas. She had recorded how often employees were interrupted, how quickly requests from senior guests were prioritized, and how differently people were treated depending on their position. One note concerned a black kitchen employee, who had been repeatedly overlooked for additional responsibilities despite years of experience. Another described how Celeste had spoken to staff when important guests were present. Graham read the pages slowly. You documented all of this? Yes. Celeste looked uncomfortable. You were judging me. Avellini shook her head. I was listening to you. Celeste had no response. Graham closed the folder. What did you decide? Avellini looked toward the windows. Manhattan stretched beneath the evening sky, hundreds of lights appearing between the buildings. I decided the company can still be changed. Graham leaned forward. Changed how? By changing who gets heard. Avellini explained that Mercer Holdings was prepared to invest, but only if Harrington Industries established stronger standards for employee treatment, transparent promotion practices, and a formal process for reporting unfair treatment without fear of being ignored. Graham listened carefully. These were not demands designed to humiliate him. They were structural changes designed to prevent people from being judged solely by their position, appearance, or background. Celeste finally spoke. And if we refuse? Avellini looked at her calmly. Then Mercer Holdings walks away. Graham looked at the proposal again. He knew the offer was valuable, but he also knew the decision was bigger than money. He looked at his wife. She avoided his eyes. Then he looked at Avellini. You could have revealed who you were the first day. I could have. Why did you not? Avellini gave a quiet answer. Because titles make people careful. Assumptions make people honest. Graham sat back. For the first time he understood why she had stayed. She had not needed to expose herself to prove anything. She had simply given people enough room to reveal who they were. And now the choice belonged to them. The meeting continued past 9 o'clock, but nobody seemed eager to leave. The city lights outside the conference room had grown brighter, reflecting against the glass walls while the documents on the table remained open between them. Graham Harrington had spent most of his career making decisions quickly, but tonight he was doing something unfamiliar. He was listening. One of the board members asked whether Mercer Holdings would accept a revised proposal, and Avellini answered carefully. The investment is not the only issue. The culture has to change with it. Graham nodded. Then I agree. Celeste looked at him in surprise. You agree? Graham turned toward her. I should have understood this sooner. His voice was calm, but there was no attempt to defend himself. Avellini came into this house as someone we believed had very little influence. Instead of asking who she was, we decided what she was worth. Celeste lowered her eyes. The words seemed to settle over the room more heavily than the financial documents ever could. Avellini remained silent. Graham continued. And you made it worse. Celeste looked up. I invited her because I thought it would be harmless. You invited her to be laughed at. Celeste did not answer. Graham looked toward Avellini. I am sorry. Avellini studied him for a moment. For what? For allowing my position to make me careless about people. He paused. And for not noticing what my wife was doing. Celeste took a slow breath. Avellini, I was wrong. Avellini did not smile. She did not make Celeste repeat herself. Thank you, she said quietly. Celeste seemed almost surprised by the simplicity of the response. You are not angry? Avellini looked at her. I was disappointed. The distinction made Celeste look away. Avellini closed the folder in front of her. But disappointment can teach you something if you are willing to learn from it. Graham nodded. Then let us learn from it. He reached for the proposal and signed the first page. Mercer Holdings will have the partnership. Avellini looked at the signature, then at him. And the employee standards? Graham signed the second page. They begin immediately. The board members exchanged quiet looks of approval. Celeste remained still beside her husband, staring at the table where she had once planned to entertain her guests with someone she believed was beneath them. Now that same room had become the place where she had to confront her own assumptions. After the meeting ended, Avellini gathered her documents and stood. Graham rose as well. Avellini. She turned. Yes. You do not have to return to this house as a cleaner. Avellini looked at him calmly. I know. Then I hope you will return as our partner. Avellini gave a small nod. We will see. Graham smiled faintly. Fair enough. Celeste remained near the window as Avellini walked toward the door. Before leaving, Avellini stopped and looked back at her. You invited me because you thought I had nothing to offer. Celeste swallowed and nodded. Avellini continued softly. Next time ask before you assume. Then she left the room. Celeste watched the door close behind her. For the first time that evening, there was no audience to impress and no joke to hide behind. There was only the quiet realization that the person she had tried to make feel small had never needed to make herself bigger. By the following morning, the Harrington mansion felt strangely different. The crystal glasses from the previous evening had been cleared away, the flowers had been removed from the dining room, and the polished marble floors reflected the pale sunlight coming through the tall windows. The house was quiet again. There were no guests, no laughter, and no carefully arranged conversations. Celeste Harrington stood alone near the staircase, looking toward the entrance where Avellini had disappeared the night before. On the small table beside her sat the invitation she had prepared for the party. She picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then quietly folded it in half. Across the room, Graham was reviewing the final documents from Mercer Holdings. The agreement had been signed. The partnership would move forward, along with the new employee standards they had promised to establish. But Graham was no longer focused only on the business. He kept thinking about something Avellini had said. Titles make people careful. Assumptions make people honest. At 8:30 that morning, a car stopped outside the mansion. Avellini stepped onto the driveway wearing a simple cream blouse, tailored trousers, and a dark coat. She carried a small leather bag in one hand. There was no entourage this time. No dramatic entrance. No room full of people waiting to discover who she was. She simply walked toward the front door. A household employee opened it and smiled. Good morning, Miss Mercer. Avellini returned the smile. Good morning. Celeste was waiting in the foyer. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Celeste looked at Avellini, then at the navy dress she had worn the previous night, now carefully folded over one arm. You brought it back, Celeste said. It was. Yours to lend, Avellini replied. Celeste nodded. She seemed unsure what to say next. Finally, she stepped aside and allowed Avellini to enter. Graham came down the staircase a moment later. He stopped when he saw them. Good morning, Avellini. Good morning, Mr. Harrington. Graham looked toward the folder in her hand. Ready for the first partnership meeting? Yes. He nodded and stepped toward the conference room. Then he paused and looked back at Celeste. Are you coming? Celeste glanced at Avellini. For a moment the old version of the evening seemed to return to her mind. The laughter, the glass in her hand, the confident smile she had worn when she believed she controlled the room. Then she looked at Avellini again. Yes, she said quietly. They walked together toward the conference room. Avellini reached the table first and placed her documents in front of her. Graham pulled out the chair beside her, not across the room or at the far end, but beside her. Celeste noticed the gesture. She said nothing. Sunlight moved slowly across the polished table, replacing the warm glow of the previous night. Avellini opened the first folder. Graham opened his. Celeste took her seat. No one mentioned the party. No one needed to. The room already carried the memory of it. Avellini looked toward the windows as the city began another busy morning. Then she turned back to the table and began the meeting. The woman who had entered the mansion as a cleaner had never needed to prove that she belonged there. In the end, the people who had underestimated her simply had to learn how to make room.